Welcome to One Book, One Coffee, where we explore the world's most profound literature, one delightful sip at a time. Today, I'm truly delighted to have you here with us, stepping into the intricate philosophical world of Plato's The Republic. The fact that you've chosen this book signifies something remarkable about you. In an era where we are constantly bombarded by endless streams of social media and the allure of binge-watching the latest shows, you've opted to dive into a timeless dialogue that has shaped human thought for centuries. This is not just any book. It's a cornerstone of Western philosophy, exploring justice, order, and the ideal state. This book has been recommended by thinkers across time. Bill Gates once remarked on its significance in understanding human values and governance. Plato, a student of Socrates and a teacher to Aristotle, was driven by the turbulent political landscape of ancient Athens to question everything about governance and societal structures. His experiences, particularly the execution of Socrates, deeply influenced his worldview and fueled his writings. Now, a quick note before we dive in. This is a detailed, chapter-by-chapter walkthrough, so it's going to be a longer session. Take your time with it. There's no rush. If you need to step away, save this video to your watch later or forward the link to yourself on WhatsApp, so you can pick up right where you left off. So grab your coffee, settle in, and let's walk through this book together. Chapter by chapter, idea by idea. Let's begin. Picture yourself settling into your favorite coffee shop on a crisp morning, steam rising from your cup as you're about to dive into one of the most profound conversations ever recorded. That's exactly what Plato invites us into with The Republic, and today we're exploring the opening act of this philosophical masterpiece, Book 1. Where the entire foundation of justice gets turned upside down and examined from every possible angle. Now, imagine you're walking down to the port of Piraeus with Socrates, Athens' most famous gadfly, as he heads to check out a new religious festival. It's a simple enough beginning, but Plato has a genius for taking ordinary moments and transforming them into extraordinary explorations of human nature. Socrates gets waylaid by some friends, including a wealthy old man named Cephalus, and what starts as casual conversation quickly becomes one of history's most important discussions about how we should live. Cephalus opens with what seems like common-sense wisdom about justice. He's lived a long life, made his money honestly, and now he can sleep peacefully knowing he's paid his debts and told the truth. Justice, he suggests, is simply being honest and paying what you owe. Think about this for a moment. How many of our parents or grandparents have echoed this exact sentiment? Work hard, be honest, pay your bills, treat people fairly. It sounds reasonable, almost comfortingly simple in our complex world of moral ambiguity. But here's where Socrates does what Socrates does best. He pokes holes in what seems obvious. What if someone lends you a weapon when they're sane and rational, but then comes back for it when they've lost their mind and might hurt someone? Suddenly, paying back what you owe becomes a recipe for disaster. This isn't just ancient philosophical nitpicking. Think about modern dilemmas we face. Should you return a friend's car keys when you know they're too drunk to drive? Should a therapist break confidentiality if a patient threatens violence? The world is messier than simple rules can handle. Enter Polemarchus, Cephalus' son, who tries to rescue the conversation with a more sophisticated definition. Justice, he argues, means helping friends and harming enemies. Now this resonates deeply with how many of us actually think, doesn't it? We naturally want to be loyal to our inner circle and protective against those who threaten what we love. Social media has amplified this tribal thinking. We share articles that support our friends' viewpoints and unleash criticism on those we see as opponents. But Socrates, like a master chess player, sees several moves ahead. He asks a deceptively simple question that unravels everything. How do we really know who our friends and enemies are? People aren't always what they seem. That colleague who seems supportive might be undermining you behind closed doors, while someone you initially dislike might become your greatest ally. We've all experienced the shock of discovering someone we trusted was working against us, or realizing that someone we wrote off actually had our best interests at heart. Even more troubling, Socrates points out that if justice involves harming anyone, even enemies, then justice makes people worse rather than better. Think about this revolutionary idea. When we set out to hurt others, even those who've wronged us, don't we diminish ourselves in the process? Modern psychology backs this up completely. Studies show that holding grudges and seeking revenge literally damages our mental and physical health, while forgiveness and compassion improve our well-being. Just when you think the conversation might find solid ground, in storms, Thrasymachus like a philosophical hurricane. This is the moment that transforms a pleasant discussion into an intellectual battle royale. Thrasymachus, fed up with what he sees as naive idealism, declares that justice is nothing more than the advantage of the stronger. Might makes right. The powerful create laws and definitions of justice that serve their interests, and everyone else just has to go along with it. Now, doesn't this sound eerily familiar? How many times have we witnessed powerful corporations writing regulations that benefit them, or seen political systems where wealth translates directly into influence? Thrasymachus isn't some ancient cynic. He's voicing what millions of people believe today when they look at inequality, corruption, and systems that seem rigged in favor of those at the top. Thrasymachus goes even further, arguing that injustice is actually more profitable than justice. The truly unjust person, he claims, can manipulate systems, exploit others, and accumulate power, while the just person gets taken advantage of like a sucker. Think about how this plays out in everyday life. The coworker who takes credit for others' work getting promoted. The business that cuts corners and maximizes profits while ethical competitors struggle. The politician who lies their way to power while honest candidates get ignored. What makes this ancient dialogue so gripping is how contemporary it feels. Socrates finds himself defending not just a philosophical position, but the very idea that being good matters in a world that often seems to reward the opposite. He's fighting for the soul of human civilization itself. The beauty of Book 1 lies not in providing easy answers, but in demolishing our comfortable assumptions and forcing us to think deeper. Plato shows us that the questions we thought we'd settled — what is justice? How should we treat others? What kind of life is worth living? — are far more complex and important than we realized. As this opening book concludes, we're left with more questions than answers, and that's exactly the point. Socrates has cleared the intellectual ground, swept away the debris of conventional thinking, and prepared us for the magnificent construction project that will unfold in the books to come. He's shown us that justice isn't just about following rules or social contracts. It's about the deepest questions of human existence and the kind of people we choose to become. This is why the Republic remains so powerful after 24 centuries. It doesn't just ask what justice is, it asks what kind of life is truly worth living, and whether being good matters in a world that often seems indifferent to goodness. These aren't just philosophical puzzles to solve over coffee. They're the questions that determine the shape of our souls and the character of our civilization. Welcome back to One Book, One Coffee, where we're diving deep into Plato's Republic, one thoughtful sip at a time. If you've been following along, you'll remember that in our last session, Socrates found himself in quite the philosophical pickle, challenged to prove that justice is actually worth pursuing for its own sake. Well, grab your favorite mug because Book 2 is where things get really interesting, and frankly, a bit unsettling. Picture this. You're sitting around with friends, maybe after a few drinks, and someone poses a question that makes everyone go quiet. That's exactly what happens when Glaucon, one of Plato's brothers, steps up to the plate. He's not satisfied with Socrates' previous arguments about justice, and he's about to present one of the most chilling thought experiments in all of philosophy. Glaucon tells the story of the Ring of Gyges, and honestly, it's the kind of tale that would make for a blockbuster movie today. Imagine a shepherd who discovers a ring that makes him invisible whenever he turns it on his finger. Now, think about this for a moment. What would you do if you could become invisible at will? No consequences, no one watching, no chance of getting caught. Glaucon suggests that this shepherd, who was previously just an ordinary law-abiding person, uses the ring to seduce the queen, murder the king, and take over the entire kingdom. The punchline? Glaucon argues that anyone, given this power, would act unjustly. He's essentially saying that we're only just because we're afraid of getting caught, not because justice is inherently good. It's like asking whether you'd still follow the speed limit if there were absolutely no police, no cameras, and no possibility of consequences. Be honest with yourself. This isn't about being a good or bad person. Glaucon is suggesting it's simply human nature. But wait, it gets even more provocative. Glaucon then paints two extreme pictures for us to consider. On one side, imagine the perfectly just person who appears completely unjust to everyone else. This person gets crucified, literally, for crimes they didn't commit, while maintaining perfect integrity inside. On the other side, picture someone who's completely unjust but appears perfectly just to the world. They're wealthy, respected, powerful, and everyone thinks they're wonderful. Now, which life would you choose? Which life is actually better? This is where our modern world becomes uncomfortably relevant. Think about social media, where appearance often matters more than reality. How many people do you know who present themselves as living perfect lives online while struggling privately? Or consider corporate scandals where executives maintain sterling reputations while engaging in massive fraud. Glaucon's challenge isn't just ancient philosophy, it's playing out on our news feeds every single day. Socrates realizes he's facing the philosophical equivalent of climbing Mount Everest. How do you prove that justice is worthwhile when someone can present such compelling arguments for injustice? His solution is absolutely brilliant and forms the foundation for the rest of the Republic. He suggests they examine justice not just in the individual, but in something much larger, the state itself. Here's where Socrates reveals his genius for analogy. He says that trying to understand justice in an individual person is like trying to read small letters from far away. But if we could see those same letters written large, on a billboard, we could read them clearly and then apply what we learned back to the smaller version. The state, he argues, is like the individual person writ large. If we can understand how justice works in a society, we can better understand how it works within each of us. This leads to one of the most fascinating discussions about how societies actually form. Socrates suggests that cities don't arise from some grand political theory, but from simple human need. None of us is self-sufficient. You can't grow your own food, build your own house, make your own clothes, and provide your own medical care all at the same time. We need each other, and this mutual dependence is what creates communities. But here's where it gets interesting for our modern world. Socrates describes what he calls the healthy city, or the city of pigs. It's a simple society where people have basic food, shelter, and clothing. They work, they rest, they enjoy simple pleasures. No one is extremely wealthy. No one is desperately poor. It sounds almost like the minimalist lifestyle movement or sustainable living communities we see today. However, Glaucon isn't satisfied with this simple life. He wants luxury, comfort, variety. He wants what we might call the good life. This demand for more than just necessities transforms the healthy city into what Socrates calls the feverish or luxurious city. Suddenly, you need artists, entertainers, makeup artists, personal trainers, interior decorators. The city grows and becomes more complex. Now, think about this progression in terms of your own life. How many of your daily concerns are about basic survival versus lifestyle preferences? When you stress about having the latest smartphone, the right neighborhood, the perfect vacation, you're living in Socrates' luxurious city. There's nothing inherently wrong with this, but Socrates is pointing out that this complexity brings new challenges. With luxury comes competition for resources. With competition comes conflict. With conflict comes the need for soldiers to protect what you have and potentially take what you want. This is how Socrates introduces the guardian class, the protectors of the city, and begins to sketch out his famous three-part division of society. What's remarkable is how this ancient analysis helps us understand modern societies. Consider how consumer culture drives so much of our economy, how inequality creates social tension, how nations compete for resources and markets. Socrates isn't just building a theoretical city. He's giving us a lens through which to examine our own world. As we wrap up this exploration of Book II's foundations, we're left with profound questions that feel as urgent today as they did 24 centuries ago. What is the relationship between individual character and social structure? Can a person be truly just in an unjust society? How much luxury and complexity can a society handle before it becomes unstable? These aren't just abstract philosophical puzzles. They're questions about how we want to live, both individually and collectively. As we move forward in our journey through the Republic, keep these foundational ideas brewing in your mind like a perfectly crafted cup of coffee, rich with complexity and full of surprises yet to be discovered. Picture this. You're sitting across from Plato at your favorite coffee shop, steam rising from your mugs, and he's about to share something that will completely change how you think about leadership, education, and what it really takes to protect a society. That's exactly where we find ourselves as we dive into Book III of the Republic, where Plato tackles one of the most crucial questions any civilization faces. Who should be the guardians, and how do we prepare them for such an enormous responsibility? Now, think about this for a moment. In our world today, we entrust our safety to police officers, our national security to military leaders, our children's futures to teachers, and our well-being to healthcare workers. But how often do we really examine what kind of education and character formation these guardians of society should have? Plato was wrestling with this exact question over 2,000 years ago, and his insights feel remarkably fresh when you consider the challenges we face today. Plato begins by painting a vivid picture of what he calls the guardian class. These aren't just soldiers or police officers in the modern sense, but rather the protectors of the entire social order. Imagine a shepherd who must be both gentle with the flock and fierce toward wolves. This is the delicate balance Plato envisions for his guardians. They must possess what seems like contradictory qualities. They need to be spirited and brave enough to defend against enemies, yet gentle and philosophical enough to treat their fellow citizens with justice and kindness. But here's where it gets really interesting, and where Plato's genius shines through. He doesn't just say, find people who are naturally both fierce and gentle. Instead, he dives deep into the question of education. How do you cultivate these seemingly opposite traits in the same person? His answer is both simple and profound. Through the right kind of stories, music, and physical training from the very beginning of life. Think about the stories that shaped you as a child. Maybe it was superhero comics, fairy tales, or family legends passed down through generations. Plato argues that these early narratives are incredibly powerful in forming character, which is why he's so concerned about the myths and stories told to future guardians. He famously critiques Homer's epics, not because they're poorly written, but because they sometimes portray the gods as petty, lying, or cruel. Now, you might be thinking, come on, Plato, they're just stories. But consider this. If you're training someone to be a guardian of justice, do you really want them growing up with tales that suggest even the gods are dishonest, or that might makes right? This connects beautifully to our modern debates about media influence. We worry about violent video games, we discuss the impact of social media on young minds, and we debate what children should and shouldn't watch on television. Plato was having essentially the same conversation, just with different media. He understood something we're still grappling with today. The stories we tell shape the people we become. The musical education Plato describes isn't just about learning to play instruments, though that's part of it. He's talking about rhythm, harmony, and the mathematical relationships that underlie all music. Why does this matter for guardians? Because music, in Plato's view, teaches the soul about order, proportion, and beauty. A person educated in proper music will instinctively recognize harmony and discord, not just in sound, but in life itself. They'll be able to sense when something is out of balance in society, when justice is being violated, or when the social order needs protection. Picture a modern police officer who has been trained not just in law enforcement techniques, but also in conflict resolution, community building, and understanding the deeper rhythms of social harmony. This officer would approach their role differently than someone trained only in the technical aspects of the job. They would see themselves as guardians of social music, if you will, responsible for maintaining the harmony that allows a community to flourish. But Plato doesn't stop with mental and spiritual education. Physical training is equally crucial for his guardians. However, he's not advocating for mere brute strength or athletic prowess. The physical education he envisions is designed to cultivate courage, endurance, and the kind of bodily discipline that supports moral discipline. When your body is strong and under your control, your soul is more likely to be strong and under control as well. Here's a fascinating detail that shows Plato's practical wisdom. He argues that guardians should live simply, almost like monks or dedicated athletes. No private property, no luxury, no family wealth to distract them from their duty. This might sound extreme to our modern ears, but think about it this way. How many scandals in leadership, how many cases of corruption or abuse of power stem from personal financial interests conflicting with public duty? Plato saw this coming from miles away. The most striking aspect of Plato's vision for guardian education is its holistic nature. These future protectors aren't just learning combat techniques or legal codes. They're being shaped as complete human beings, with their emotions, intellect, body, and spirit all developed in harmony. The goal isn't to create perfect warriors or brilliant strategists, but wise human beings who can be trusted with power because they understand both its proper use and its terrible potential for abuse. As we close this exploration of Book 3, Consider how Plato's insights might apply to the guardians in your own life and community. What kind of education and character formation do we provide for our teachers, our police officers, our military personnel, our elected officials? Are we training them just in the technical skills of their jobs, or are we helping them develop the wisdom, temperance, and moral courage that true guardianship requires? These questions feel as urgent today as they did in ancient Athens, reminding us that some human challenges are truly timeless. The journey through the Republic continues to unfold, and as we'll see, Plato's vision of the ideal guardian will become the foundation for everything else he builds in his perfect city. Picture this. You're sitting in your favorite coffee shop, watching the morning rush unfold around you. There's the barista who knows exactly how much foam you like, the manager coordinating orders with quiet efficiency, and the security guard who keeps everything safe and orderly. Each person has their role, and when everyone does their job well, the whole place hums with perfect harmony. This is exactly the kind of observation that would have delighted Plato, because in Book 4 of the Republic, he's obsessed with one fundamental question: what makes something truly harmonious, whether it's a coffee shop, a city, or even the human soul? Now, think about this for a moment. We've spent the last 3 books of the Republic building our ideal city from the ground up. We've got our guardians protecting the state, our philosophers ruling with wisdom, and our producers creating everything we need. But Plato isn't satisfied with just describing the structure. He wants to dig deeper and ask, what makes this city actually work? What's the secret sauce that transforms a collection of individuals into something greater than the sum of its parts? Here's where Plato gets absolutely brilliant. He realizes that to understand the harmony of the state, we need to understand the harmony of the individual soul. It's like trying to read a book with tiny print, he suggests. Sometimes it's easier to find the same text written in large letters somewhere else, then come back to the small version with fresh eyes. The state, he argues, is simply the soul writ large. If we can figure out what justice looks like in a city, we can apply those same principles to understand what justice looks like in a person. So let's start with the city. Plato identifies 4 cardinal virtues that make the ideal state function beautifully. First, there's wisdom, which belongs to the ruling class, the philosopher-kings. These aren't your typical politicians who promise everything and deliver nothing. These are people who've spent their lives studying truth, beauty, and goodness. They make decisions not based on what's popular or profitable, but on what's genuinely best for everyone. Think of them like the best kind of doctor, one who gives you the treatment you need, not necessarily the one you want. Then there's courage, which flows from the guardian class, the protectors of the state. But here's what's fascinating about Plato's understanding of courage. It's not just physical bravery in battle, though that's part of it. It's the ability to hold on to right beliefs even when everything around you is falling apart. It's like a dye that's been properly set in fabric, he says. No amount of washing or bleaching can remove it. These guardians have been so thoroughly educated in what's worth protecting that they'll defend those values no matter what pressures they face. The third virtue is moderation or temperance, and this one's really interesting because it doesn't belong to any single class. Instead, it's like a harmony that runs through the entire city. It's the agreement between all the different groups about who should rule and who should be ruled. Picture an orchestra where everyone agrees that the conductor should lead, the violins should follow their part, and the percussion should keep time. Nobody's fighting for someone else's role because everyone understands that their own contribution is essential to the beautiful music they're creating together. Finally, there's justice, and this is the big reveal. justice isn't some separate virtue you add on top of the others. Justice is what happens when wisdom, courage, and moderation are all working together perfectly. It's each part of the city doing its own job excellently, without interfering with the others. The philosophers rule, the guardians protect, and the producers produce. When everyone stays in their lane but coordinates beautifully with everyone else, you get justice. Now here's where it gets really personal and relevant to our modern lives. Plato takes this same framework and applies it to the human soul. Just as the city has three classes, the soul has three parts. There's the rational part, which corresponds to the Philosopher-Kings. This is your ability to think clearly, plan ahead, and make decisions based on wisdom rather than impulse. Then there's the spirited part, like the guardians, which gives you courage, ambition, and the drive to protect what you value. Finally, there's the appetitive part, corresponding to the producers, which includes all your desires for food, pleasure, money, and material things. Think about the last time you faced a difficult decision. Maybe you were considering whether to take a new job, end a relationship, or make a major purchase. Can you recognize these three voices in your head? Your rational mind weighing pros and cons, your spirited nature pushing you toward what feels brave and right, and your appetites pulling you toward what promises immediate pleasure or comfort. The key insight Plato offers is that a just soul, like a just city, isn't one where these parts are at war with each other. It's one where they're working in beautiful harmony. In a just soul, reason rules, but not as a tyrant. It's more like a wise parent who understands that the spirited part needs outlets for its energy, and the appetitive part needs to be fed and cared for, but within proper limits. Your courage supports your rational decisions instead of leading you into foolish risks. Your appetites provide the energy and motivation you need to live fully, but they don't hijack your judgment or compromise your values. This isn't just ancient philosophy. This is incredibly practical wisdom for navigating modern life. We live in a world that constantly tries to appeal to our appetites while bypassing our reason. Social media algorithms, advertising, political rhetoric, even dating apps are all designed to trigger our immediate desires and emotional responses. Understanding Plato's model of the soul gives us a framework for maintaining our integrity and making decisions we won't regret. As we prepare to dive deeper into the Republic's exploration of knowledge and reality in the books ahead, we're carrying with us this powerful insight. True harmony, whether in a society or in a human life, isn't about suppressing different elements, but about orchestrating them beautifully. Justice isn't a rule imposed from outside, but the natural result when wisdom guides, courage protects, and desire serves rather than dominates. Pour yourself another cup of coffee, because we're about to discover how this harmony connects to some of the most famous ideas in all of philosophy. Picture this. You're sitting in that coffee shop again, and your friend Plato is about to drop what might be the most controversial idea in all of political philosophy. He's been building up to this moment through 4 entire books, carefully laying the groundwork, and now he's ready to reveal his master plan for the perfect society. He leans forward, takes a sip of his coffee, and says something that would make every politician in history either laugh or tremble. You know what we really need? Philosopher-Kings. Now, before you start imagining Socrates wearing a crown or Aristotle sitting on a golden throne, let's unpack what Plato actually means here, because this isn't just some academic fantasy. This is Plato's serious attempt to solve one of humanity's most persistent problems. How do we get good people in charge? Think about it for a moment. How many times have you watched the news and thought, These people making decisions have no idea what they're talking about. How often have you seen leaders who seem more interested in power than in actually helping people? Plato saw the same thing in ancient Athens, and it frustrated him to no end. He watched as democracy put incompetent people in charge, as tyrants seized power through manipulation, and as good people suffered under bad leadership. So he asked himself a radical question. What if we could design a system where only the wisest, most virtuous people could rule? Enter the Philosopher-King, Plato's answer to this age-old problem. But here's where it gets interesting, because Plato isn't talking about just any philosopher. He's not suggesting we hand power over to every person who's read a few books or can quote ancient wisdom. No, he's describing a very specific type of person, someone who has undergone decades of rigorous training in both intellectual and moral development. Imagine, if you will, a leader who has spent years studying mathematics, astronomy, and music, not to show off at dinner parties, but to understand the fundamental patterns that govern reality. Picture someone who has grappled with the deepest questions about justice, truth, and the good life, not in some ivory tower, but through direct engagement with the messy realities of human nature. This is someone who has learned to see beyond the surface level of things, beyond the immediate political pressures and popular opinions that drive most decision-making. But here's the beautiful irony that Plato presents. The very people who would be best suited to rule are the ones who least want to do it. Think about this paradox for a moment. The philosopher, having glimpsed ultimate truth and understanding, finds the world of politics petty and corrupting. It's like asking someone who has spent years studying the stars to come back down and argue about parking regulations. The philosopher would much rather continue pursuing wisdom than deal with the endless compromises and conflicts of political life. This creates what Plato calls the fundamental problem of political philosophy. The people who want power are usually the last people who should have it, while the people who should have power are the ones who want it least. It's a bit like how the best teachers are often those who are terrified of getting up in front of a classroom, while the worst are those who love the sound of their own voice. So how does Plato solve this dilemma? He proposes something that sounds almost impossible. We need to either convince philosophers to become kings, or we need to turn our kings into philosophers. In other words, we need to create a system where the pursuit of wisdom and the exercise of power are united in the same person. Now, you might be thinking, that sounds great in theory, but how would this actually work? And you'd be asking exactly the right question, because Plato knows this is a hard sell. He's essentially arguing that we need leaders who have spent 15 to 20 years in intensive education, studying everything from abstract mathematics to practical ethics, and who have proven themselves capable of putting the common good above their personal interests. Consider what this might look like in our modern world. Imagine political leaders who had to demonstrate mastery not just of economics or law, but of psychology, environmental science, and moral philosophy. Picture decision-makers who had spent years learning to distinguish between what seems popular and what is actually beneficial, between what feels good in the short term and what leads to genuine flourishing in the long term. The more you think about it, the more radical Plato's proposal becomes. He's not just suggesting better education for politicians. He's proposing a complete transformation of how we think about leadership itself. Instead of viewing politics as a game where the most charismatic or ruthless person wins, he envisions it as a craft requiring the highest level of skill and wisdom. But here's where Plato's vision gets even more interesting. The Philosopher-King isn't just someone who knows a lot of facts or can solve complex problems. This is someone who has undergone a fundamental transformation of character, someone who has learned to love truth more than popularity, wisdom more than wealth, and justice more than personal advantage. It's the difference between a politician who knows what the polls say and a leader who knows what's right. The challenge, of course, is that creating such leaders requires a complete reimagining of education and society. Plato isn't just proposing a new type of ruler. He's proposing a new type of human being, one shaped by decades of careful cultivation. It's ambitious to the point of seeming impossible, which is exactly why it's so compelling. As we close this exploration of the Philosopher-King, consider this. While Plato's specific proposal might seem unrealistic, his underlying insight remains as relevant as ever. The quality of our leaders shapes the quality of our lives, and the way we select and prepare those leaders might be the most important decision any society makes. Whether or not we'll ever see a true philosopher-king, Plato's vision challenges us to think more seriously about what we really want from those who hold power over our collective future. Picture this. You're sitting in a dimly lit cave, watching shadows dance on the wall, completely convinced that these flickering images represent reality itself. Now imagine someone comes along and tells you that what you're seeing isn't real at all, that there's an entire world of blazing sunlight and true forms waiting outside. This is exactly the kind of mind-bending revelation that Plato drops on us in Book 6 of the Republic. And trust me, once you grasp what he's really saying here, it'll change how you see everything around you. So far in our journey through the Republic, we've watched Socrates dismantle conventional notions of justice and propose his ideal state ruled by philosopher-kings. But now comes the million-dollar question that his listeners are probably thinking. What exactly makes these philosophers so special? Why should they be the ones running the show? Plato's answer is absolutely revolutionary, and it centers around something called the theory of forms. Think about this for a moment. When you see a beautiful sunset, what exactly are you experiencing? You might say you're seeing beauty itself, but Plato would gently shake his head and say, "Not quite." According to him, that sunset is merely participating in or reflecting something far more fundamental, the form of beauty itself. It's like the difference between seeing a reflection of the moon in a pond versus looking directly at the moon in the sky. The reflection might be lovely, but it's not the real thing. This is where things get fascinatingly complex. Plato argues that our physical world, everything we can touch and see, is essentially a world of copies. Behind it lies a realm of perfect, eternal forms. There's the form of justice, the form of beauty, the form of goodness, and even forms for everyday objects like tables and chairs. These aren't just abstract concepts floating around in some philosophical vacuum. For Plato, they're more real than anything we experience with our senses. Now, you might be thinking, this sounds pretty far-fetched. How can an invisible, intangible form be more real than the chair I'm sitting on right now? Here's where Plato's genius really shines through. Consider mathematics for a second. When you think about a perfect circle, you're not thinking about any particular circular object you've seen. You're thinking about the concept of circularity itself, something that no physical circle can ever perfectly embody. Every circle you draw will have tiny imperfections, but the mathematical concept of a circle is absolutely perfect. That's essentially what Plato means by forms. But here's where it gets even more interesting. Plato doesn't just stop at saying these forms exist. He creates this beautiful, illuminating metaphor called the Allegory of the sun to help us understand how we can actually come to know these forms. Just as the sun makes physical sight possible by providing light, there's something that makes intellectual understanding possible. And what might that be? The form of the good itself. Picture the sun for a moment. It doesn't just allow us to see things, it actually gives life to everything around us. Plants grow because of sunlight, seasons change because of the sun's position, and our entire ecosystem depends on solar energy. The form of the good works similarly in the realm of knowledge and reality. It's not just another form among many. It's the source that gives reality and truth to all the other forms. Without the good, nothing else could truly exist or be known. This creates what Plato calls a hierarchy of reality and knowledge. At the bottom, we have images and shadows, mere copies of copies. Think about watching a movie on your phone versus experiencing the actual events the movie depicts. The movie is already a representation, and watching it on a small screen is even further removed from reality. Above that, we have the physical objects themselves, then mathematical concepts and reasoning, and finally, at the very top, we have direct knowledge of the forms themselves, illuminated by the good. Now, here's where this becomes incredibly relevant to our modern world. We're living in an age of information overload, where we're constantly bombarded with images, opinions, and representations of reality through social media, news, and entertainment. Plato would probably look at our smartphone screens and say, "You're all living in an even deeper cave than I imagined." We're often consuming shadows of shadows, getting our understanding of reality through filters, algorithms, and carefully curated presentations. But here's the hopeful part of Plato's vision. Some people, through rigorous education and philosophical training, can actually climb out of this cave of illusions. They can move from seeing shadows to seeing reality itself. These are the philosophers, and this is precisely why they should rule. They're not just smart people with opinions. They're individuals who have literally seen truth itself. Think about how this applies to leadership today. Don't you want leaders who have moved beyond just reacting to the latest polls or social media trends? Wouldn't you prefer someone who has grappled with fundamental questions about justice, goodness, and truth? Plato is essentially arguing that until we have leaders who understand reality at its deepest level, who have seen the form of justice itself, we'll continue to stumble around in the shadows of political opinion and temporary solutions. The beauty of Plato's theory of forms is that it gives us a framework for thinking about what really matters. In a world obsessed with appearances, success metrics, and surface-level achievements, Plato reminds us that there are deeper truths worth pursuing. When we're making decisions about our careers, relationships, or values, we can ask ourselves, are we chasing shadows on the cave wall, or are we moving towards something more fundamental and lasting? As we prepare to dive even deeper into Plato's vision, remember that this theory of forms isn't just an abstract philosophical exercise. It's a call to examine our own lives and ask whether we're content with illusions, or whether we're brave enough to seek truth itself. The journey from the cave to the sunlight isn't easy, but according to Plato, it's the only path to genuine wisdom and the kind of leadership our world desperately needs. Welcome back to One Book, One Coffee. I hope you've got your favorite mug in hand, because we're about to dive into one of the most mind-bending and influential passages in all of Western philosophy. Today, we're exploring Book 7 of Plato's Republic, home to the legendary Allegory of the Cave. If you've ever felt like you were living in a bubble, or wondered whether what you see around you is really the whole truth, then this ancient story is going to hit you like a lightning bolt of recognition. Picture this scene with me. Socrates is still deep in conversation with his friends, and he's about to tell them a story that will change how they think about knowledge, reality, and what it means to truly understand the world around us. But here's what makes this so brilliant. Plato isn't just spinning an abstract philosophical tale. He's painting a picture that speaks directly to the human experience of waking up to truth. So let's step into this cave together. Imagine, Socrates says, a group of people who have been chained in an underground cave since birth. These aren't just casual visitors who wandered in. They've literally never known anything else. Their heads are fixed in place, so they can only look straight ahead at the wall in front of them. Behind them, there's a fire burning, and between the fire and the prisoners, there's a raised walkway where people carry various objects, statues, animals, all sorts of things. The prisoners can't see these people or objects directly. All they see are the shadows these objects cast on the wall in front of them. Now, think about this for a moment. What would reality look like to these prisoners? Those flickering shadows dancing on the wall. That would be their entire universe. They'd probably even have names for different shadow shapes. They might become experts at predicting which shadow would appear next. To them, this shadow world wouldn't be a pale imitation of reality. It would be reality, complete and whole. But then something extraordinary happens. One prisoner breaks free from his chains. Can you imagine the shock? First, he turns around and sees the fire, this blazing light that's been creating all those shadows. His eyes, accustomed only to dim shadows, would be burning with pain. The real objects casting the shadows would look strange and distorted compared to the familiar shadow shapes he's known his whole life. He might even think the shadows were more real than these bizarre three-dimensional things. Here's where Plato's genius really shines through. This isn't just about physical sight. It's about every moment in your life when you've had to confront the fact that something you believed was incomplete or wrong. Remember the first time you realized that your parents weren't perfect? Or when you discovered that a news source you trusted had been misleading you? That uncomfortable, almost painful feeling of having your worldview challenged, that's exactly what this prisoner is experiencing. But the story doesn't end there. Suppose someone drags this prisoner up and out of the cave entirely, into the world of sunlight. Now we're talking about a complete transformation of reality. At first, the sun would be absolutely blinding. He'd want to run back to the comfortable dimness of the cave, but gradually his eyes would adjust. He'd see trees, mountains, the sky, other people, a whole world of richness and beauty that he never could have imagined from his shadow wall perspective. Think about your own life for a moment. Haven't you had experiences like this? Maybe it was traveling to a different culture and realizing how limited your perspective had been. Maybe it was learning a new skill that opened up entirely new ways of seeing. Or perhaps it was going through a difficult experience that, painful as it was, gave you insights you never would have gained otherwise. That's the journey from the cave to the sunlight. Now comes the really challenging part of the story. What if this enlightened prisoner decides to return to the cave to tell his former fellow prisoners about the incredible world above? Picture this scene. He stumbles back into the darkness, his eyes no longer adjusted to the dim light. He can barely make out the shadow shapes that his friends are still expertly identifying. When he tries to tell them about the sun, about trees, about the real world above, they think he's lost his mind. Worse, they might even become hostile toward him for challenging their comfortable reality. Does this sound familiar? Think about whistleblowers who expose corruption and get attacked for it. Think about scientists who propose new theories and face ridicule from their peers. Think about anyone who's tried to share a difficult truth with people who aren't ready to hear it. The messenger often gets shot, doesn't he? But here's what makes this allegory so powerful and relevant to our modern world. We're all living in various kinds of caves. Social media creates echo chambers where we see only information that confirms what we already believe. Our education systems, our cultural backgrounds, our economic circumstances, they all create walls that limit what we can see and understand. The shadows on our walls might be political talking points, advertising messages, or cultural assumptions we've never questioned. The journey out of the cave isn't a one-time event. It's a lifelong process. Every time you read a book that challenges your thinking, every time you have a deep conversation with someone who sees the world differently, every time you travel somewhere new or learn something that expands your perspective, you're taking steps toward that sunlight. And here's the beautiful paradox that Plato understood so deeply. The people who have seen the most light, who have the broadest perspective, are often the ones who feel most compelled to go back and help others make that same journey. They become teachers, writers, leaders, activists, not because it's easy or comfortable, but because they can't unsee what they've seen. As we wrap up our exploration of this timeless allegory, I want you to consider this question. What caves might you be living in right now? What shadows might you be mistaking for reality? And perhaps, most importantly, when someone offers to show you a different perspective, will you have the courage to step into the uncomfortable brightness of a larger truth? The cave allegory reminds us that wisdom isn't just about accumulating facts. It's about being willing to have our entire worldview transformed again and again in service of a deeper understanding of reality. Welcome back to One Book, One Coffee, where we dive deep into the timeless wisdom of great books. I hope you've got your favorite mug filled and ready, because today we're exploring one of the most fascinating and frankly unsettling parts of Plato's Republic. We're venturing into Book 8, where Plato shows us how even the most perfect society can crumble from within. It's like watching a slow-motion train wreck, except the train is civilization itself. Now, think about this for a moment. Have you ever wondered why great empires fall? Why does success often contain the seeds of its own destruction? Plato was asking these exact questions over 2,000 years ago, and his insights feel almost prophetic when we look at the world around us today. In Book 8, Plato takes us on a journey through what he calls the decline of the state. He's essentially mapping out how his ideal republic, that perfectly just society we've been building throughout the earlier books, inevitably degenerates into increasingly corrupt forms of government. It's not a happy story, but it's one that feels remarkably relevant as we watch political systems around the world struggle with polarization, corruption, and the erosion of civic virtue. Plato begins this descent with what he calls timocracy, which comes from the Greek word for honor. Picture this. The ideal state starts to crack when the guardian class, those philosopher-kings we've been talking about, begin to value honor and military glory more than wisdom and justice. It's like watching a brilliant teacher slowly become obsessed with winning awards rather than actually educating students. The focus shifts from doing what's right to looking good while doing it. Think about how this plays out in our modern democracies. How often do we see politicians who seem more concerned with their approval ratings, their media coverage, or their legacy than with actually solving problems? Plato saw this coming from miles away. In a timocracy, the rulers start competing with each other for prestige and recognition. They begin to accumulate private property, which was forbidden in the ideal state, and gradually the whole system starts to prioritize winning over wisdom. But here's where it gets really interesting, and honestly, a bit scary. Plato doesn't stop there. He shows us how timocracy inevitably slides into oligarchy, which is rule by the wealthy few. Imagine a society where the pursuit of honor gradually transforms into the pursuit of wealth. The timocratic leaders, having tasted private property, become increasingly focused on accumulating riches. Eventually, wealth becomes the primary qualification for political power. Does this sound familiar? Look around at many modern democracies, and you'll see echoes of this everywhere. When campaign contributions determine political access, when lobbying firms have more influence than voters, when the primary qualification for running for office seems to be personal wealth or the ability to raise massive amounts of money, we're witnessing Plato's oligarchy in action. The Constitution gets rewritten, not formally perhaps, but practically, so that political power flows to those with the deepest pockets. Plato paints a vivid picture of what oligarchic society looks like. He describes it as a state divided against itself, where a small group of wealthy rulers sits atop a large population of poor citizens. The rich get richer, while the poor get poorer, and the middle class gets squeezed out of existence. Sound familiar? The oligarchs live in constant fear of the masses they're exploiting, so they spend enormous resources on security and control rather than on education, infrastructure, or genuine prosperity for all. But the story doesn't end there, and this is where Plato's analysis becomes almost chilling in its prescience. He shows us how oligarchy contains the seeds of its own destruction. When inequality becomes extreme enough, when enough people are pushed to the margins, revolution becomes inevitable. The poor masses eventually rise up against their wealthy oppressors, and democracy is born from this uprising. Now you might think, great. Democracy sounds like progress, right? But here's where Plato delivers one of his most controversial insights. He argues that democracy, while born from noble impulses for equality and freedom, carries within it the seeds of chaos and ultimately tyranny. In Plato's view, democratic society becomes obsessed with freedom and equality to such an extent that all authority, all expertise, all hierarchy gets questioned and eventually destroyed. Picture a society where every opinion is considered equally valid, where expertise is dismissed as elitism, where the loudest voice carries more weight than the most informed one. Plato describes democratic citizens as being like spoiled children who refuse to accept any limits or guidance. They demand absolute freedom, but they use that freedom to pursue their immediate desires rather than cultivating wisdom or virtue. The democratic state, in Plato's telling, becomes a kind of marketplace of desires where politicians compete to promise voters whatever they want to hear. Leaders stop trying to educate or guide the citizenry and instead become followers, constantly polling public opinion and adjusting their positions accordingly. Does this remind you of anything in our current political landscape? The constant focus groups, the Twitter polls, the politicians who seem to change their positions based on whatever's trending that week? And here's the truly unsettling part of Plato's analysis. He argues that this excessive freedom and equality in democracy eventually creates such chaos and division that people become desperate for order. They become willing to trade their freedom for security, their democracy for strong leadership. Enter the tyrant, who promises to restore order and make everything great again. The tyrant emerges as a champion of the people, someone who claims to represent their interests against the corrupt elites. But once in power, this supposed champion reveals their true nature. They eliminate opposition, concentrate power, and transform from the people's protector into their oppressor. The very democracy that was born from overthrowing oligarchy ends up producing something far worse than what it replaced. What makes this analysis so powerful and honestly so disturbing is how clearly we can see these patterns playing out throughout history and even in our own time. Think about the rise of authoritarian leaders around the world, many of whom came to power through democratic processes, promising to drain swamps and fight corruption, only to become the very thing they claimed to oppose. As we wrap up this exploration of political decline, remember that Plato isn't just giving us a history lesson or making predictions. He's showing us that the health of any political system depends ultimately on the character and wisdom of its citizens. The decline he describes isn't inevitable if we remain vigilant, if we cultivate virtue, and if we remember that freedom without wisdom leads to chaos, and chaos inevitably leads to tyranny. Next time, we'll explore how this political analysis connects to Plato's understanding of the human soul, because for him, the state and the individual are mirrors of each other. Until then, keep that coffee warm and those questions brewing. Welcome back to our journey through Plato's Republic, where we've been exploring the different types of souls and their corresponding governments. We've met the aristocratic soul, the timocratic soul driven by honor, the oligarchic soul obsessed with wealth, and the democratic soul scattered by endless desires. Today, over our steaming cups of coffee, we're diving into perhaps the most chilling and yet fascinating character in Plato's entire cast, the tyrannical soul. This is Book 9, and trust me, what Plato reveals about tyranny will make you look at power, desire, and human nature in completely new ways. Picture this scene that Plato paints for us. Imagine a young man born into that democratic household we discussed last time, where every desire gets equal treatment and there are no real boundaries. His father, remember, was that oligarchic type who eventually loosened up and started indulging in pleasures he'd previously denied himself. But now we're looking at the son, and something has gone terribly wrong. This young man doesn't just dabble in various pleasures like his democratic father. No, he's been captured by something far more dangerous. Plato introduces us to a concept that feels remarkably modern, the idea that some desires are like sleeping beasts within us. During the day, when we're awake and our rational mind is in control, these wild desires stay relatively quiet. But at night, in our dreams, or when we let our guard down, they emerge. These aren't your ordinary wants for food or comfort. These are the lawless desires, the ones that would make us commit acts we'd never consider in our right mind. Think about the most disturbing dream you've ever had, where you did things completely contrary to your waking values. That's what Plato is talking about. Now, here's where it gets really interesting. Most of us, even those with democratic souls, keep these wild desires in check most of the time. We might have the occasional crazy dream or fleeting dark thought, but our rational mind and social conditioning keep us from acting on them. But the tyrannical man? He's different. These lawless desires have somehow taken over not just his dream life, but his waking life too. Plato tells us this transformation often happens when the young democratic man falls in with the wrong crowd. Picture a modern scenario: a college student from a permissive household who gets involved with a group that gradually introduces him to more and more extreme behaviors. Maybe it starts with excessive partying, then moves to harder substances, then to increasingly risky and harmful activities. Each step seems like just a small escalation, but eventually, the person has traveled so far from their starting point that they're unrecognizable. The tyrannical soul, Plato explains, becomes enslaved to a master passion. This isn't just being really into something, like how someone might be passionate about music or sports. This is complete domination by a single, overwhelming desire that consumes everything else. Think about addiction in its most severe forms, or how some people become so obsessed with power or revenge that they'll sacrifice their families, their health, their moral principles, everything, to feed that one consuming hunger. What's truly frightening about Plato's description is how the tyrannical man relates to other people. Remember how the democratic man at least respected the equality and freedom of others. The tyrannical soul sees other people as nothing more than tools or obstacles. Other humans exist only to serve his desires or to be eliminated if they get in his way. There's no empathy, no recognition of shared humanity, no moral boundaries whatsoever. Now think about this. Plato argues that the tyrannical man is actually the most miserable person of all. This might seem counterintuitive. After all, if he's getting everything he wants and has no moral constraints holding him back, shouldn't he be happy? But here's Plato's brilliant insight. True happiness comes from harmony within the soul, and the tyrannical soul is the most disharmonious of all. Imagine being a slave to your most extreme desire. You might think, well, at least he gets to satisfy it. But that's exactly the problem. The tyrannical soul is never satisfied because the master passion is insatiable by nature. It's like being perpetually thirsty, but only being able to drink salt water. Each drink makes the thirst worse, not better. The tyrannical man lives in constant anxiety, always needing more, always fearing that someone will take away what he has, always suspicious that others are plotting against him. Plato draws a direct parallel between the tyrannical soul and tyrannical government. Just as the tyrannical man is enslaved to his basest desires, a tyrannical state is enslaved to the whims of one person who has lost all moral constraints. The tyrant ruler, like the tyrannical soul, sees citizens not as fellow human beings with inherent worth, but as resources to be exploited or threats to be eliminated. This analysis feels remarkably relevant when we look at authoritarian leaders throughout history and even today. Think about how dictators often start by promising to fulfill people's desires, to give them what democracy supposedly couldn't deliver. But once in power, they become increasingly paranoid, isolated, and destructive. They surround themselves with yes men, eliminate anyone who might challenge them, and ultimately create societies where everyone, including the tyrant himself, lives in fear. What makes Plato's analysis so powerful is his recognition that tyranny isn't just a political problem, it's fundamentally a psychological one. You can't understand tyrannical governments without understanding tyrannical souls, and you can't create a just society without fostering just individuals. But here's something hopeful in Plato's vision. He's showing us that even the worst human condition, the tyrannical soul, develops through a series of choices and influences. This means it's also potentially preventable. By understanding how someone becomes tyrannical, by recognizing the warning signs in ourselves and our society, we can work to prevent this psychological and political disaster. As we prepare to move toward Plato's final arguments about justice and the philosopher's vision of truth, we carry with us this sobering reminder of what happens when the soul loses its way completely. The tyrannical man serves as both a warning and a mirror, forcing us to examine our own desires and ask ourselves, which part of our soul is really in charge? So here we are, settling into our final cup of coffee together as we explore the magnificent conclusion of Plato's Republic. Can you believe we've journeyed this far? From that simple question about justice in a marketplace conversation to the deepest mysteries of existence itself. Book 10 feels like Plato pulling back the curtain on the universe's greatest secrets, and honestly, it's the kind of conversation that makes you want to call in sick to work just to keep thinking about it. Picture this scene with me. Socrates has spent 9 books methodically building his case for justice, showing us the ideal city, explaining the nature of reality through shadows on cave walls, and now he's about to deliver what might be philosophy's most audacious claim. He's going to argue that your soul, yes, your very essence, is immortal. Now, think about this for a moment. How do you even begin to prove something like that? It's not like you can run a laboratory experiment on immortality, but Socrates, being Socrates, approaches this with the same logical precision he's used throughout our journey. He starts with something beautifully simple yet profound. Everything in existence, he argues, has something that can destroy it. Fire destroys wood, rust destroys metal, disease destroys the body. But here's the fascinating twist. Each thing can only be destroyed by its own particular evil, its own specific corruption. Wood doesn't fear rust, and metal doesn't worry about termites. So what, Socrates asks, is the soul's particular evil? What could possibly corrupt or destroy the essence of who you are? He identifies injustice, cowardice, ignorance, and other moral failings as the soul's diseases. But here's where it gets really interesting. Have you ever noticed that even the most wicked person doesn't simply cease to exist because of their wickedness? The soul seems to endure, even when corrupted by vice. Think about history's most notorious villains. They lived full lives despite their moral bankruptcy. Their souls weren't annihilated by their evil choices. This leads Socrates to a remarkable conclusion. If the soul's own particular evils can't destroy it, then nothing can. It's like discovering that something is immune to its own poison. The soul, therefore, must be indestructible, immortal, eternal. Now, I know what you might be thinking. This sounds almost too good to be true, doesn't it? But consider the implications of this argument in your own life. Every choice you make, every act of kindness or cruelty, every moment of courage or cowardice, these aren't just temporary blips in an ultimately meaningless existence. They're shaping something eternal within you. When you choose to help a stranger, comfort a friend, or stand up for what's right even when it's difficult, you're not just affecting the immediate situation. You're participating in something cosmic, something that transcends the brief span of your physical life. But Socrates doesn't stop there. He wants to show us what this immortality means for justice itself. Remember how we started this entire conversation? Someone had argued that injustice pays better than justice, that good guys finish last, that crime does pay if you're clever enough not to get caught. Well, if the soul is immortal, then the game board is much, much larger than anyone imagined. Here's where Plato introduces one of literature's most haunting and beautiful stories, the myth of Picture a warrior named who dies in battle, but then, impossibly, returns to life to tell us about the journey souls take between lives. It's like the ultimate near-death experience, except gets the full tour of what happens after we die. Describes souls arriving at a mysterious place where they face judgment for how they lived. Those who were just and virtuous are sent to experience rewards beyond imagination, while those who caused suffering must experience corresponding punishment. But here's what's truly fascinating about this cosmic justice system. It's not arbitrary revenge. It's more like a natural law, as inevitable as gravity. Think about it this way. Have you ever noticed how carrying guilt or shame feels heavy, while acts of genuine kindness seem to make you lighter? Plato is suggesting this isn't just psychological, it's metaphysical. The very structure of reality ensures that justice ultimately prevails, even if we can't always see it in our limited, earthly perspective. The myth goes on to describe souls choosing their next lives, And here's where it gets really practical for us today. The souls who had lived wisely before made better choices, while those who had lived carelessly often chose poorly again. It's like the ultimate character development program. Your choices in this life are preparing you for wisdom or foolishness in whatever comes next. Now, you might wonder, does this mean we should be good only because of some cosmic reward system? Socrates would say, absolutely not. Remember, we've already established that justice is inherently better for the soul, that the just person lives a more harmonious, fulfilling life, regardless of external rewards. The immortality of the soul and cosmic justice aren't bribes to be good. They're confirmations that the universe itself is structured to support what we already know to be true. That justice is better than injustice, that virtue is better than vice, that love is better than hate. Consider how this applies to your daily life. Every time you choose integrity over convenience, compassion over indifference, or courage over comfort, you're aligning yourself with the fundamental structure of reality. You're not just being nice or following rules, you're participating in something eternal and cosmic. As we close this remarkable journey through the Republic, think about how radically this changes everything. Your life isn't a brief candle in the wind. Your choices matter on a scale that transcends anything you can fully comprehend. The justice you pursue, the love you give, the wisdom you seek, these aren't just temporary human constructs. They're expressions of something immortal within you, something that connects you to the deepest truths of existence itself. And that, my friend, is perhaps the most practical wisdom of all. Live like your soul is eternal, because according to Plato's most profound insights, it just might be. So here we are, settling into the final pages of the Republic with our coffee getting just a bit cooler, and Plato has saved something absolutely extraordinary for the end. You know how some stories stick with you long after you've heard them? Well, the myth of air is one of those tales that has been haunting readers for over 2,000 years, and once you hear it, you'll understand why. Picture this scene. Socrates has just finished his grand argument about justice, about the ideal state, about the soul and its parts. You'd think he might wrap things up with a neat philosophical bow, maybe summarize his main points. But instead, he leans forward and says something like, "Let me tell you a story." And what a story it is. Was a soldier, Socrates tells us, who died in battle. But here's where it gets interesting. When they came to collect the bodies 10 days later, Er's body was still fresh, untouched by decay. They took him home for burial, but just as they were about to light his funeral pyre, suddenly came back to life. And the story he told about where his soul had been during those 10 days. Well, it changed everything anyone thought they knew about life, death, and the choices we make. Now, think about this for a moment. Why would Plato, this master of logical argument, end his greatest work with what seems like a ghost story? It's because sometimes the deepest truths can't be captured by pure reason alone. Sometimes you need a story that reaches into your gut and makes you feel what justice really means. Described traveling to an extraordinary place, a kind of cosmic courthouse where souls were judged for the lives they had lived. Imagine the ultimate performance review, except instead of discussing your quarterly sales figures, you're accounting for every act of kindness, every moment of cruelty, every choice between doing what's right and doing what's easy. The souls were sorted into two groups. Those who had lived justly were sent upward to experience rewards, while those who had lived unjustly were sent downward to face punishment. But here's what's fascinating. This wasn't permanent damnation or eternal bliss. After 1,000 years, these souls would return, and they'd be given the most important choice imaginable. They could select their next life. Think about that weight for a second. You get to choose who you'll be in your next existence, but you have to live with that choice for an entire lifetime. The scene Plato paints is almost like a cosmic lottery, but instead of numbers being drawn, souls are choosing their destinies. There were lives of kings and peasants, athletes and artists, men and women, even animals. And here's where the story becomes a mirror held up to human nature. Most souls made their choices based on their previous experiences, often learning exactly the wrong lessons. Watched as a soul who had previously lived as a king immediately grabbed the life of a tyrant, thinking only of power and luxury, not bothering to read the fine print that this life would involve murdering his own children. Another soul, remembering the pain of political life, chose to become a swan, thinking that avoiding human complexity would bring peace. Odysseus himself, tired from all his adventures and suffering, searched until he found the quiet life of an ordinary citizen who minds his own business. Now, doesn't this sound remarkably familiar? How often do we make choices based on our past hurts rather than our future wisdom? The person who was betrayed in love and swears off relationships entirely, or the one who grew up poor and becomes so obsessed with wealth that they sacrifice everything else meaningful. We're all choosing our lives every day, aren't we? Maybe not as dramatically as in Ayre's vision, but in countless small decisions that add up to who we become. What's brilliant about this myth is how it connects to everything Socrates has been arguing throughout the Republic. Remember his point about the soul having different parts: reason, spirit, and appetite? Here we see souls making choices based on which part is driving them. The soul choosing tyranny is being led by appetite for power. The one choosing to become a swan is letting emotion override wisdom. But Odysseus, who chooses the quiet life, seems to have learned to let reason guide him. The myth also reinforces Socrates' central argument that being just is always better than being unjust, not because of external rewards or punishments, but because of what it does to your soul. The souls who had lived justly were better equipped to make wise choices in their next life. They had practiced the kind of thinking and character that leads to good decisions. Justice, in other words, is its own reward because it makes you the kind of person who chooses well. Think about someone you know who seems to consistently make good decisions, who has what we might call wisdom. Chances are they didn't develop that overnight. They've been practicing justice, practicing putting reason before impulse, practicing caring about more than just their immediate desires. They've been training their souls just like an athlete trains their body. And here's perhaps the most practical wisdom from Ayre's tale. We all have more choice than we think. Yes, we're born into certain circumstances, face certain limitations, encounter certain challenges, but within those constraints, we're constantly choosing who to become. The bitter person and the grateful person might have faced similar hardships, but they've made different choices about how to respond. As we close the Republic together, this myth reminds us that Plato's vision of justice isn't just about creating the perfect state. It's about creating the best possible version of ourselves. Every day, in small ways and large, we're choosing our lives. We're deciding whether to let reason guide us or be driven by our appetites. We're choosing whether to develop the kind of character that makes wise decisions or to remain trapped in patterns that lead to suffering. So the next time you're facing a choice, whether it's how to respond to a difficult colleague, how to spend your evening, or what kind of person you want to be in a relationship, remember Ayre's vision. You're not just making a decision for today, you're choosing who you're becoming. And that choice, Plato suggests, might be the most important one you ever make. Plato's The Republic is a profound exploration of justice, society, and the human soul. It challenges us to reflect on the nature of justice, the ideal state, and the role of the individual within society. Through Socratic dialogue, Plato presents a vision of a society governed by philosopher-kings, where wisdom and reason prevail over the pursuit of personal gain. Here are some key takeaways from this classic work. 1. The quest for justice. At its core, The Republic is an inquiry into the nature of justice. To apply this, begin by examining your own life. Are your actions aligned with your values? Start incredibly small by making one decision each day that reflects fairness and integrity. 2. The importance of education. Plato emphasizes the role of education in shaping individuals and society. To put this into practice, commit to lifelong learning. Whether it's reading a book, attending a workshop, or having meaningful conversations, be patient with yourself as you expand your knowledge. 3. The role of the Philosopher-King. Leadership should be based on wisdom and reason. In your personal life, strive to lead by example. Start by taking responsibility for your actions and decisions, and encourage those around you to do the same. 4. The Allegory of the Cave. This allegory teaches the importance of seeking truth and understanding beyond appearances. Apply this by questioning assumptions and seeking deeper understanding in everyday situations. Be open to changing your perspective. 5. Balancing the three parts of the soul. Plato describes the soul as having three parts: reason, spirit, and appetite. Finding harmony among these is key to personal fulfillment. Begin by identifying areas where you may be out of balance and make small adjustments to align your actions with your values and goals. Before you go, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a comment below with at least one idea from this book that stuck with you. One concept you're going to carry forward. It could be something that challenged your thinking, something you want to try, or even something you disagreed with. Your insight might be exactly what another listener needs to hear today. And if this summary gave you something valuable, a new perspective, a spark of motivation, or even just a peaceful hour with your coffee, share it with someone who might need it too. Subscribe to One Book, One Coffee and hit that bell icon so you never miss a new summary. Every week, we sit down together with one great book, one warm cup of coffee, and the simple belief that wisdom, shared well, can change lives. Until next time, keep reading, keep growing, and remember, every small step counts. See you at the next book.